Not in the abstract way people describe things as life-changing, in the specific, measurable way where the person you are before the call and the person you are after it are genuinely different. Where the call divides your life into two chapters, before and after, and there is no going back to the first one. For Anika Nilles, that call came in early 2025. And her first reaction was not excitement, it was not gratitude, it was not the rush of recognition that her years of work were finally paying off in the most spectacular possible way. It was something closer to dread. Not because she didn't want it, but because she understood, immediately and completely, what it would actually require of her, what it would cost, what it would ask her to become in a very short period of time. Because Anika Nilles, more than almost anyone who was offered this opportunity, had the musical intelligence to understand exactly what she was being asked to do. She was being asked to play Neil Peart's drums. And the question that began immediately in her head, the one that stayed there through the 5-day session in Canada, through the months of preparation, through the Juno Awards, through the stick drop on opening night, through every review and every comment section and every standing ovation, was the question that only the person actually living it can answer honestly. Am I really the right person for this? This is the story of what it felt like to be Anika Nilles, from the inside. Before she was Rush's drummer, Anika Nilles was a Rush listener, but not in the way you might expect. She has been honest about this in her interviews, was more honest than the story probably needed her to be. She was not a lifelong Rush devotee. She had not grown up with moving pictures on repeat, had not memorized every Peart fill, had not spent teenage years in awe of what he could do with a kit. She knew Rush the way most serious professional musicians know Rush, as a landmark in the landscape of rock music that you acknowledge with respect because any musician worth their training acknowledges it. She knew Tom Sawyer, she knew the general shape of the catalog, she understood the significance. But she did not know it the way Rush fans know it. She did not have the decades of emotional investment that 70,000 people in the Kia Forum had brought to those recordings. And here is the interesting thing. That might have been precisely why Geddy Lee and Lifeson wanted her. She has reflected on this directly. The musicians who grew up loving Rush, Matters All Chairs, the ones who had Peart's fills memorized, who had strong feelings about every performance choice, who brought their own years of invested emotion to the idea of someone else sitting in that chair, and they might have been the wrong choice precisely because of how much they cared. They would have been trying to be Neil Peart, not because anyone asked them to, but because they loved him too much not to. Nilles could approach the music differently. She could approach it as a musician rather than as a devotee. She could study it with professional respect rather than personal reverence. She could find out what the songs actually needed rather than what her memories of them told her they needed. She came in fresh. And in the context of what this tour needed to be, not a tribute act, not a resurrection, but a living, breathing continuation, fresh may have been the rarest and most valuable thing she had to offer. The rehearsal session in Canada, 5 days in a private room with Geddy Lee and Lifeson, before anyone outside knew it was happening, has been described from Lee and Lifeson's perspective in multiple interviews. They talked about their doubts, about the day 4 moment when they considered looking elsewhere, about the day 5 breakthrough when everything clicked. But what was it like from inside the kit? Nilles has described the beginning of that process in terms of professional honesty that takes real courage to voice. She said that when she first started playing Rush's songs in that room, she felt, in her own word, uncertain. Not technically uncertain. She could play the notes, she could get through the structures. But there was something that wasn't landing. A feel that she could recognize was absent but couldn't yet locate. This is one of the most specific and difficult experiences a musician can have, knowing something is wrong without being able to name what it is. Being able to hear the gap between what you're doing and what the music needs, without being able to bridge it yet. She has said that the specific challenge of Peart's playing, liming larygation, the thing that made it impossible to simply learn from notation, was that his parts weren't just rhythmically complex, they were melodic. He played the drums the way some musicians play a melody instrument. The fills were not decorative. They were structural. They had the same inevitability that the right word in a sentence has. You feel it when it lands correctly, and you feel the wrongness when it doesn't, even if you can't articulate why. She spent those first 4 days trying to find that inevitability. And there were moments, her own account confirms this without sentimentality, when she wasn't sure she was going to find it. And then something shifted. On that 5th day, in a room in Canada with 2 men watching from across the rehearsal space, the tumblers fell into place. The feeling arrived, the gap closed. She has described that moment with characteristic directness. She said it was like the music suddenly made sense from the inside rather than being something she was studying from the outside. Like a language becoming fluent rather than translated. She looked at Lee and Lifeson. They were smiling. After the 5 days in Canada, Nilles went home, and then the real work began. She has described the months that followed as unlike anything she had done before in her professional life. Not more difficult in terms of raw technique. She had spent 20 years developing technical skills that very few drummers in the world possess, but different in kind. Different in what it asked of her as a person as much as a musician. She threw out her existing method for learning new material. Her normal approach, visual charts, map structures, listening alongside notation, failed almost immediately when applied to Peart's compositions. The parts were too internally complex, too dependent on feel, too full of the particular logic of one specific musical mind, to be captured in a way that could be read off a page. So she immersed, she listened, she watched live footage not to copy what she saw, but to understand what she was watching. She studied interviews where Peart talked about drumming, not to get technical information, but to understand how he thought. She paid attention to details that notation would never capture, his ride cymbal sound, the specific way he approached a fill, the tone of his snare in different contexts. She has talked about the loneliness of this process. Not loneliness in a distressed way, but in the specific way that total immersion in a demanding creative project creates a kind of solitude. When you are spending most of your waking hours inside someone else's musical language, trying to absorb it until it feels like your own, you are by definition largely unavailable to the rest of your life. She has also talked with real honesty about the doubt that lived alongside the work during those months. The question that wouldn't leave, am I the right person for this? She could hear herself getting closer. She could feel the music becoming more her own. But the doubt was persistent because the stakes were so clear. She understood, every day of that preparation, exactly what would happen if she was wrong. On March 29, 2026, at the Juno Awards in Hamilton, Ontario, Anika Nilles performed with Rush in public for the first time. What the audience saw? A drummer walking onto a national television stage and playing Finding My Way, from Rush's 1974 debut album with confidence and precision. What the reviews described, a flawless debut. What the fandom said, she's good. What they didn't see was the hours before. Nilles has spoken about the specific kind of fear that existed in the lead-up to that performance. Not stage fright in the ordinary sense. She has been a professional performer for 2 decades, and stage fright is not a significant part of her experience. This was different. This was the specific anxiety of knowing that every single person in that room, and everyone watching on television, and everyone who would see the footage afterward, was going to be listening for one thing: is she good enough? Not is she impressive, not is she talented, those were not the questions. The question was simpler and harder: is she good enough to deserve to be in this space? Good enough to play the music that Neil Peart played? Good enough for Rush fans, who had protected his legacy with the specific intensity of people who had lost someone irreplaceable and were not yet sure whether they were ready to let the music live again? She walked out onto that stage carrying all of that, and she played, and it worked. What she said afterward, in interviews, in social media posts, is not triumphant, it is grateful. There is a difference. Triumph is about yourself. Gratitude is about everything else. She expressed gratitude to the Rush community for the reception, gratitude to Lee and Lifeson for the trust, gratitude to the moment for existing. That quality, also, the capacity for gratitude rather than triumph, tells you something important about who she is. Opening night, Kia Forum, June 7, 2026. Xanadu, the first song of the first show, the opening of the first Rush concert in 11 years, 15,000 people and every single one of them waiting, in their own different way, to find out what this was going to be. And she dropped a stick. From the outside, it looked like this. A drumstick fumbled during a complex passage, a millisecond of potential disaster, a recovery so fast that many people in the audience didn't register what had happened until they saw it on the screen, and then an explosion of approval that turned the near miss into a triumph. From the inside, it looked like this. She has described the moment with the kind of clear, calm precision that comes from having absorbed something fully. She dropped the stick. Her hand went to the spare, which was mounted on the kit exactly for this scenario, positioned exactly where it needed to be, because she had thought about this possibility and prepared for it. She found the fill. She landed it. She kept going. What she has emphasized about that moment, and this is the part that matters, is that it was not a crisis. Not in her experience. Her hands knew where the spare was. Her body knew the fill. The months of preparation had put everything that needed to be automatic into the automatic part of her. The drop happened. The response happened. They were not separate events that required a decision between them. They were one continuous thing. She has also said that the crowd's reaction, the wave of approval that rolled through the arena when people understood what had happened and how she had handled it, was overwhelming in a way she had not anticipated. Not because she needed validation, but because it was the moment she understood, viscerally rather than intellectually, that the audience was with her, that they wanted her to succeed, that the 15,000 people in that building were not her judges, they were her partners. After that moment, she said, the rest of the night felt different. Here is what I think the Anika Nilles story is really about, when you look at it from the inside. It is not a story about a musician overcoming impossible odds. The skill was always there, the talent was never in question. If it had been purely a question of technical ability, the outcome was never in doubt. It is a story about what it costs to show up for something that matters. The specific cost of saying yes to a responsibility that is larger than you, that you are not sure you can carry, that you carry anyway because saying yes is what your entire professional life has been preparing you to do, even though you couldn't have known it was preparing you for this. She almost said no. She said yes. She spent months in the solitude of preparation, doubting and working in equal measure. She walked onto a Juno Award stage carrying the weight of everything she was being asked to be, and played Finding My Way. She dropped a stick at the Kia Forum and her hands already knew what to do next. And in the moments between all of that, in the quiet of the rehearsal room in Canada when the music first made sense from the inside, in the space after the crowd's approval on opening night washed over her, she found something that was not triumph, something quieter and more lasting. She found out who she was when the hardest possible version of her job asked everything she had. That answer, whatever it felt like to her in those private moments, is what the rest of us have been watching from the outside and calling remarkable. From the inside, it was simply the work, done as completely as she knew how. If this perspective on Anika Nilles' journey resonated with you, drop a comment. What moment in her Rush story has moved you most? Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.